Hello friends, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, back with another video using some of the just released products from Simon Says Stamps Make Merry release. This is actually part of a blog hop. I'll get into that later. I am starting off with the center cut Snowflakes background stamp. These center cut backgrounds, Simon has done quite a few of them over the last couple years. And sometimes it's different elements of the image that, pops out of the center. In this case, there is a circular little border and then a sentiment. So I pop that out because I'm going to use that separately. And I'm working with my great big scrapbooking MISTI, like the 12 by 12 one. It's not necessary. You could totally do this with a regular size MISTI. I just kind of like having the space, even though I technically don't have the space. But, I'm not having to fiddle quite as much when I'm using my big one. So I took the thicker foam insert out of this and I lined up the stamp and I'm stamping it onto watercolor paper with clear embossing ink. And I used my anti-static powder tool first. And I'm inking this up and stamping this multiple times onto the watercolor paper. So about 3 times. Only because I want to make sure I get a really good impression. I would rather be safe than sorry, stamp things multiple times, and then, when I pour the embossing powder over it, everything clings where it's supposed to, I've got a good impression, and I'm good to go. So, since I had everything out, I decided to do 2, also because I was curious. I wanted to see what one would look like. I wanted to do one in gold, so I'd stamped it, put on the gold embossing powder, and then I just set it aside without heating it yet. I'm going to heat them at the same time. And then I'm stamping a second piece of watercolor paper and I'm going to do silver embossing powder, which I don't do very often. It's just a personal thing. I gravitate towards gold for whatever reason. But again, thought why not do one in each color. Plus I was planning on doing different colors of the shimmer powders. So after I stamped the second one, and I could have just kept going if I had enough time, as always. And these pieces, by the way, they're roughly 4 by 9 inches. That's also why I chose the larger MISTI, because the regular size MISTI I think is about 8.5 inches at the widest. So yeah, it would have hung over a bit. It was just more convenient to use the great big, my big boy here. So I heat embossed both these at the same time. So I got my heat tool, heated up a little bit, melted all that embossing powder, and even just like this. I was thinking, so many ideas. I'm like, you don't even have to color this, anything. Just the detail is gorgeous. But I wanted to use my Tonic shimmer powders. I haven't used these in a while. So I taped both of these pieces down to some hardboards. This just makes it a little bit easier and it helps them to, as they dry, they'll dry flat rather than warping. And then I am very gently sprinkling Nouveau shimmer powders. I've done multiple videos using these. I think I have a playlist and I will link to it at the end of this video. With these, I basically kind of scrape my fingernail along the bottom of the bottle. I'm not really tapping and I'm definitely not squeezing because you don't need very much. And if you squeeze these bottles, you will get just a pile of powder and a little goes along. Like right now that it doesn't look like there's much on here. Wait till I spray it with water. So the one with the gold embossing, I used Violet Brocade, Cherry Bomb, and Golden Sparkler. The one with the silver embossing, I used Sunray Crosette, I think that's how you pronounce it, Lilac Waterfall, and Atlantis Burst. And then I sprayed them with water. And you can see just the fun of shimmer powders. And yes, this is going to look like a hot mess. It always does. I use my finger. I do this quite often. I use my finger a little bit just to kind of put some color where there wasn't a whole lot of color. And then I'm actually going to take a dry baby wipe and I'm kind of sop up just the blobs of liquid I have here, just because I didn't want tons of liquid. Plus this will help it dry a little bit faster. But other than that, I don't do anything else. The more I use these, it's one of those things where it's leave it alone. Don't keep playing with it. Just leave it alone. So I just kind of sopped up the excess liquid on both of these. Moved a tiny bit of the color around. I didn't want them to, really blend in each other because I want the, different colors and all that. And then I set these aside to dry. And I leave them completely alone. You can heat set them. I've done that many times as well. And I did with these actually a little bit later, just off camera. They were almost completely dry, so I used my heat tool just to finish it. But I just walk away because it's amazing how different they look when they're wet versus when they're dry. So while those were drying, I'm working on the other elements of these cards. So I have the center piece from that center cut Snowflakes, and I'm just stamping it onto just white cardstock with the same clear embossing ink. I'd use my anti-static powder tool. Right now I'm working on the regular size MISTI, just because with smaller stuff, there's no point hauling out that big one. I keep it stored under my desk because it's just huge. Anyway, I stamped the sentiment from that center cut Snowflakes set or background onto the white cardstock, heat embossed, one with the gold embossing powder, one with the silver. And then I'd taken out the foam out of my MISTI because that was a cling, red rubber cling background stamp. Now I'm working with a clear stamp, so I put the foam back in my MISTI. And this clear stamp is from just the Thankful Flowers set that was released quite some time ago. But I really liked the bold sentiment. The nice thing with this is I could totally have gone, made Christmas cards with this, but the warmest thanks sentiment, I was like, you know what, just kind of like a winter themed thank you card. So I wanted a nice sentiment on the inside. So I pulled out the Thankful Flower stamp set, and I absolutely love, this is one of my favorite stamps, is the You Couldn't Be More Awesome sentiment. So I did the exact same thing. Stamped it with clear embossing ink onto some white cardstock, and then one I heat embossed with the gold embossing powder, one with silver. So after I had done all of that, the warmest thanks sentiments, I am going to die cut with one of Simon's Nested Circle wafer dies. So I'm going to tape that wafer die into place, and I'll die cut both of those with that wafer die. And then the You Couldn't Be More Awesome sentiments, I just trimmed down with my paper trimmer. And then my card bases, I did one with Doll Pink cardstock, one with Audrey Blue cardstock. Both of them were cut 7 inches by 8.5, scored at 3.5. So both of these will be 3.5 by 8.5 inch slimline cards. And my card bases, I'm going to put back into the big MISTI. And I'm just using a piece of scrap paper here. So I didn't feel like cutting the scrap paper down, so I just readjusted where the card base was and then moved the stamp to make it work. So I'm going to line up that center cut Snowflake stamp again in the similar way how I'd stamped it for the front of the cards. And for the Doll Pink card base, I end up inking up the stamp with Worn Lipstick Distress Oxide ink. So it's subtle, but it just, gives it that little extra something on the inside. And then I'm going to line up the Audrey Blue card base. And that one, I've cleaned the stamp off before I ink it up again. And this time I'm going to ink it up with Peacock Feathers Distress Oxide ink and stamp that onto the inside of the second card. So once those are stamped, I can set those aside. My backgrounds are now dry and look completely different than they did when they were wet. So now they are completely dry, so I can peel off the painter's tape here. And normally I would die cut these with my the new Slimline nested rectangles wafer dies that I've been using in like every Slimline video since they came out in the beginning of September. I put them somewhere and I don't know why. I was booking things for the kids, teacher conferences and paying bills, doing all those things. Like it's like when you have your keys in your hand. I set those wafer dies down somewhere and I can't find them, and I'm really upset about it. Anyway, I would have used the wafer die because that also the pressure would have flattened them out perfectly as well. I'm really annoyed about that, and maybe me saying this in the video will just make them pop out of wherever like I put them somewhere really random. I don't know. I'll find them somewhere. Anyway. I trimmed down those backgrounds to be slightly smaller than both of these card bases. I adhered the sentiments to the inside of the cards with craft tacky glue. I just adhered them over top of the circle opening. And then the backgrounds I adhered to the card fronts with more craft tacky glue. And then the sentiments that I had die cut with the nested circle wafer die, I popped up with just some thin 3D foam squares to give it that little bit of dimension. And then, of course, I'm going to add a bit of bling. So I have some Studio Katia Icy Sparkle Crystals. These ones are clear with like a silvery shimmer glitter in them. They're gorgeous. So that went with the silver embossed background. And I just kind of liberally sprinkled those throughout the background, and then it adhered into place with craft tacky glue. And then the gold embossed background, I used, of course, my favorite gold sparkle crystals. Same thing. They're clear crystals with gold glitter in them, and I love. So heavily sprinkled those throughout the background as well. Adhered them into place with dabs of craft tacky glue, and that finished off these cards. So I'm going to turn the flashlight on my phone so you guys can kind of get an idea of just the sparkle and the shimmer of these shimmer powders. I just love it. I don't seal them. I get asked that in the videos. I don't use any sort of spray or sealant. I find they're fine. If a person's going to rub their hands all over a card after I give it to them, well, that's on them. I'm not going to worry about it. But yeah, it doesn't like fall off or anything. They're good to go. So that's the cards for the moment. I will have a link below my video to my blog post. I'll link to the supplies. This is part of a blog hop celebrating this Make Merry release. There's tons of inspiration and giveaways. So that info will also be in my blog post. You can check it out if you're interested. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye.